how have you seen tech change? I mean, you probably hinted at the answer not much earlier on, but there must have been some things you saw from perhaps day one on the job versus like the AI age that we're in now.
We're doing things that I wrote about back then in 2000 around, CDs are commonplace now, and then we're utilizing, different forms of 3D modeling, and we are within cost management utilizing different kinds of programs for schedule management and for cost management, et cetera, et cetera. So we have moved the dial, but I think with the advance of the technology is far more advanced than what we're using. And particularly over the last 2 years with what's happened since the rise of ChatGPT, I think the goalposts have changed massively. And if you look at it in those terms, we're not utilizing it as much. But I would say that there are probably loads of other industries who are in that place who are trying to work out how to utilize this new technology.
Do you see if the industry is speeding up maybe in the last few years in terms of technology, or is it going the same pace?
Yes, we are speeding up. That is definite. I think the industry has moved on more in the last 2 years than it probably has in the last sort of 10, 15 years, simply because there are so many more players in the market. So I don't know if you guys were at Digital Construction Week last year. You just see how many startups are springing all the time, how much money is going into these kind of solutions, that it's just inevitable that it is going to change the industry.
Do we think that AI agents will be able to go from, let's say it's a 10-step process, go from step 1 to 10 without a human in a loop?
The key word you mentioned there is human in the loop. So a lot of people get really scared with AI agents because they think you give it a task and then it goes and sends something out, and the next moment you'll get a call from someone saying, what the hell's this? But that's not the way it works. That the human in the loop is really important. So within these agentic workflows, you can set checkpoints where a human can check what's happening and set approvals for it along the way. So let's take the tender process, for instance. The first port of call might be to develop a contents and around what they'll be including in it. Now, you could set it to go straight to the next task, which is then start producing it. But the sensible thing to do would be actually to say there's a human in the loop intervention point here where an email or something goes to a human to say, yeah, okay, I like that, carry on, or no, that's not quite right.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks and Bytes podcast, where we dive into construction and AEC technology. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
This episode is brought to you by Build Vision, transforming construction supply chain by bringing contractors, manufacturers, and stakeholders onto a single software platform. Visit buildvision.io to find out more.
So good afternoon, James. It's nice to be speaking to someone in the UK. Actually, it's second time this week, which is a little bit of a rare occurrence for Bricks and Bytes, as we're typically over the pond.
Yeah, but this time you've got a Spurs supporter, so it's even better, right?
Yeah, and just to preface that, Wednesday we had an Arsenal supporter. Today is Friday. We got a Spurs fan, and I'm a Chelsea fan. So
how could it possibly go wrong, eh?
Fireworks.
Glad we're not doing it live. Face to face.
All right. Okay, James. So thanks for joining us. You're the global head of data insights and analytics at Gleeds. Is that correct?
Yeah. That is correct at the moment. I think there's going to be a slight tweak to that, but as of today, that is correct. Yes.
It's a very a corporate title, should I say?
Yeah, it's a corporate organisation, and but as these things evolve, and now a big part of my role is around AI, which we're going to talk about. So that will probably be a reflection in that at some point soon.
Ooh.
As these things are.
Yeah, definitely. So what could you maybe just tell us briefly what Gleeds does as a whole? Like maybe some information, how many employees, the main services, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we're one of the biggest sort of construction consultancies. The way I like to describe us is we do everything other than the design and the construction of buildings. But all the bits in between, right? We do all the project management, we do the surveying, and that's a bit of a lie because we do building surveying, so there's a bit of design involved in that. But effectively, we do the consultancy part. So that can be anything from project management, project controls, it can be quantity surveying, it can be employer's agent, it can be dispute resolution, all those kind of bits that hold the process together.
The unsexy ones, right?
The unsexy ones, but obviously the important ones. It wouldn't happen without us. That's what I say.
Or would it?
Oh, would it? Yeah.
How many? So you guys are in something. How many countries in total? Do you know?
I can't remember exactly. It's around 17 or 18, I think. But most countries most of the continents in the world we're covered. And we've got a big presence in the UK. I think we've got about 19 offices in the UK, and then we're quite big around Europe, and then we're growing quite significantly in the US. We've got presence in Australia. We've got presence in parts of like Peru is one of our newest offices. And we're growing all the time. I mean, I find it hard to keep track because we are growing. We're on a growth spurt, so there's new offices cropping up all the time. And in this kind of multinational world that we're living in, there's more and more clients who are looking for us to move into other spaces as well, on other regions.
So are you growing your presence in the Western world to serve perhaps Africa and Asia? Or are you setting up offices there? A
bit of both. I mean, one of our biggest offices is actually in India, apart from the UK. But sometimes we will service a project from another region, if that's the way to do it. But there's certain sort of growth areas that we're very focused on, obviously the Middle East being one, and then the US being another.
Very good. Okay, so we teased a little bit of the conversation before we go into a little bit about you, but today we're going to focus on, as the title of your job would suggest, data insights analytics, which ultimately leads to AI. So perhaps, James, this is very open, but what does the future of AI, agents, data, etc. look like in construction?
I think we're at the very beginning of an exciting period in construction, because we haven't been great at sort of utilizing technology up until this point. And I was just telling you the story before we started recording, actually. I recently met up with my old university professor, and the reason that was interesting was because my dissertation at the time, this was in 2000, was all around what tech would look like in construction in 10 years' time, so 2010. And we were the first time we met in about 20 years, and we were sort of reflecting on it about, yes, we've made some progress, but nowhere near as much as we should have, and nowhere near as much as other industries progress. And we were kind of debating why that was, and there's lots of reasons why that happens around kind of being risk adverse, low profit margins, et cetera, But a lot of those barriers that have been there up till now, which have stopped us growing to the extent that we should have, are going away with these new kind of breed of AI agents. Because number one, the cost of entry is going down all the time. Number two, the ability to be able to the low code solutions to build these things yourself is getting easier and easier all the time. And I think the public consciousness is at the place now where they realize we spent the last 2 years talking about how important AI is going to be, and more people are waking up to it. So I think we're nicely positioned now to take advantage. And the agentic stuff, which...
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Personally, I'm so excited about is absolutely perfect for what we do in construction, because we work in workflows. Doesn't matter what we do, whether it's a procurement, whether it's the actual construction, whether it's, the project management, it's all around workflows, which is perfect for these agentic systems that are developing. And when you actually look at it and you look at the stuff that we do, there's so much wastage. And we're not talking about automating it all with these agentic things, but if we can automate 80% or 70%, that frees up the incredibly skilled but incredibly time poor people in industry to do more of what they're good at. So I think it's going to change the landscape quite significantly over the course of the next maybe 3, 4, 5 years.
Okay. Very interesting. I think it's still kind of funny, and I'm going to tease you a little bit, but most people I know that work in corporate still have maybe not heard of ChatGPT. Well, definitely heard of it, but never used it, should I say?
That's so true.
They can't. Most of the cases, for their work purposes, they cannot use it.
Well, and that's an interest. So another role of mine is I'm the current chair of something called the Project Data Analytics Task Force. So I'm able to do a lot of talks around the industry, around the world, actually. I've talked at places like University of Delhi and, for the University of Boston. And I talk to a lot of things at the associations like the APM and the RICS. And I always start with that poll, Martin, in terms of how many people here have actually used ChatGPT. And it's always a relatively low number who've actually even used it. And one of the best anecdotes I've got on this is that I won't mention the actual name of the conference, but I did a workshop at a conference recently where we were actually going to roll our sleeves up and get people playing with some of these systems, because a lot of people had heard the noise around AI, but they were like, the next thing we need to do some practical stuff, like how does this actually work? So we divided people up into 3 groups, like absolute beginners, people who have never used it before, people who have tinkered with it, but they're not experts, and then people who would class themselves as quite mature in it. And in this workshop, there were people who had the title like head of data in their title, and you'd be amazed how many of those people went into the first group, which was amazing.
Wow.
I found that unbelievable. So even people around the industry who have got this kind of notional interest in data haven't used it. And I think it does come down to what you say, Martin, is because a lot of organizations have banned the use of it. But that presents another problem for me, because how do you ban this stuff? It's a bit like going back to 1994 and trying to ban Google. I mean, well, you'll access it another way, right?
Yeah, it's just a matter of time, I think, and a great opportunity for internal projects to emerge within organizations and allow people to do stuff much more efficiently.
Exactly.
It's I was going to say, James, maybe we will dive a little bit deeper into there. But how does someone become the global head of data at somewhere like Gleeds?
Well, but before that, you were saying that you are right now in this position. Where are you getting promoted then?
Well, always fingers crossed for a promotion. I think it's just going to be an evolution of what I'm doing, because when I came into this position in 2020, AI was not the buzzword it is now. So I think it's just going to be, I don't think it's a massive change. It would just probably reflect what I'm doing a bit more in terms of the AI side of things.
Global head of data and AI.
Yeah, but you do realize once they put AI in your job title, that is like major pay rise, right?
Well, the other side of it is it a buzzword? And when the buzzword ends, do I end up sitting there saying, this is a really bad looking job title? So all those things have gone through my head. But in answer to your question, Owen, I think the way to get to the position is probably not through the way that I've done it, which was I'm very lucky to work for an incredible organisation that is a very loyal organisation. I've been with Gleeds since I graduated as a QS. Now, my journey kind of didn't quite go according to plan. When I graduated, the plan was to do a couple of years, get my chartership, and then go into academia. That's what I really wanted to do. And I failed massively at that, because 20 years later, I was still doing QSing. But having said that, really amazing job. So I got to work in the education sector.
Hey, James, at least you passed your chartership. I failed that 3 times.
No. You passed it now?
No.
He's always a fourth time lucky, right?
Hey, you got one step further.
I think he got fed up and not tried again, right?
I started a podcast instead.
Yeah. So if you fail your charge, you start a podcast. Yeah. Sounds like a good thing. But I don't regret it, because I ended up working on incredible jobs, and I did a lot in the education sector. So I worked for a lot of the Oxford colleges. So I ended up working with some of the brightest people you can imagine. I worked for Imperial College and some of the other universities in and around the Southeast. So it was a great period, but I always had this kind of nagging feeling that, we're not moving fast enough in terms of the tech side of things and what I had written about when I was at university. So in about 2020, I got given the opportunity to take over from the departing Professor Sarah Davidson. So she used to be head of INA, and she's a great friend. She's a friend of the podcast that I host, which is Project Flux, where she came on as a guest. She moved on to become a professor at the University of Nottingham. So they offered me the opportunity to go into insight and analytics. Now, at the time, that wasn't too much of a digital job. It was very much around the market reports that we do. So I spent a good year or so getting that into a good place with a fantastic team. But then that got subsumed into the digital team, the wider digital team. And then just by kind of organic change, I ended up becoming more and more involved in the data and the tech side of things. So it's been a very sort of organic kind of movement rather than anything forced, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So what's your day-to-day like? What do you work on?
So I know this is going to sound cliche and every guest will say the same, but no 2 days are the same, which is genuinely true, because the stuff we're working on is moving at such a pace. So as well as having a load of projects. So the way I look at things is there's 3 strands to what I do. There's the market report and research, which goes on, and that is getting more and more data driven, as you can imagine. The other one is internal tools to make our people smarter, more efficient at what they do. So these aren't things that are client facing. They're just things to help our surveyors and our project managers deliver their projects better. And then there's the external facing solutions, which are digitally enabled. So things like our digital twinning service, our digital PMO. So those are the 3 kind of strands that we're working on. And my day can be on any one of those things, but probably typically, like we were talking about before, Martin, it will be managing the team and making sure we're sticking to our commitments about what we said we're going to do. But I suppose another part of it is then reacting, because the tech's moving so fast, reacting to what happens out there in the market. Because as you know, OpenAI can drop a new model and it can just change everything. And we're having to say, well, how we're going to incorporate this to what we're doing. And that happens more than you can imagine.
How big is your team within Gleeds that deals with data, technology?
Yeah, so there's the core team. We're like the hub and spoke mentality, if you like. So the core team is relatively small, probably about 15 of us, including some people in India. But then obviously they've got the spokes all around the business, because what we've got to do is infiltrate into the core business to make sure, otherwise we do it in a silo. We've got to make sure that we're working with the head of project management, the head of cost management, to make sure that these things are going into their systems. So the wider team, it's very difficult to gauge how much that would be, but it'll be probably in the hundreds by the time you think of the amount of people who are involved in one way or another in terms of supporting what we're doing or trying to get that out into their arena.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, James, maybe over the last 20 years or so, as that's how long you've been at Gleeds, how have you seen tech change? I mean, you probably hinted at the answer not much earlier on, but there must have been some things you saw from perhaps day one on the job versus like the AI age that we're in now.
And perhaps, if I can add to it, do you see if the industry is speeding up maybe in the last few years in terms of technology, or is it going the same pace?
Yeah, good question. So look, we have moved on since 2000. So, we're doing things that I wrote about back then in 2000 around, CDs are commonplace now, and then we're utilizing, different forms of 3D modeling, and we are within cost management utilizing different kinds of programs for schedule management and for cost management, et cetera, et cetera. So we have moved the dial, but I think with the advance of the technology is far more advanced than what we're using. And particularly over the last 2 years with what's happened since the rise of ChatGPT, I think the goalposts have changed massively. And if you look at it in those terms, we're not utilizing it as much. But I would say that there are probably loads of other industries who are in that place who are trying to work out how to utilize this new technology, because it opens up the floodgates for so many things. Like I talked about before, so many of the barriers that you could have blamed the lack of adoption on before have now gone because of these. But there's still a sense from people they're not sure how to embrace it. So I don't want to be too dismissive. We have moved the dial, but in terms of the second part of your question, Martin, yes, we are speeding up. That is definite. I think the industry has moved on more in the last 2 years than it probably has in the last sort of 10, 15 years, simply because there are so many more players in the market. So I don't know if you guys were at Digital Construction Week last year. You just see how many startups are springing all the time, how much money is going into these kind of solutions, that it's just inevitable that it is going to change the industry. So, for instance, you've got two of people that I've interviewed on my podcast are Dev Amasia from Nplan, who I think you've had on as well, and Greg Lawton from Nodes and Link. What those guys are doing incredible, right? I mean, it's early days still really with what they're doing, but it's the kind of stuff that is going to change what we're doing. It's not massively adopted yet, but it will become massively adopted over the course of next year. So the rate is speeding up, I think.
Do you at Gleeds, do you guys interact with the external startup and tech ecosystem? Do you purchase solutions and use them on a day-to-day?
Yeah, so Gleeds are not software providers. We don't build software. There's some solutions that we build up through our team, but they're mainly internal. And the stuff that we build, we usually partner with people. So, for instance, we'll partner with a tech provider. So take something like our digital twinning service. We haven't gone out there and developed our own digital twinning service from scratch. But what we do understand is clients like someone to stitch together all the different technologies into a solution that they can understand and you can talk to them about. Because some of the problems with the tech companies is they talk a tech language that clients don't understand. And that's where I think our role is. We take all this stuff and we kind of become translators between the tech world and the project delivery world. So yeah, we absolutely, we utilize this software. We are using Nodes and Link, we're using Nplan, other software, and then we are sort of working with providers who help power some of our solutions. Even the AI stuff that we use, obviously we're not building our own large language model, we're fine-tuning the open AI model. So I think it would be pretty foolish to try and build and reinvent the wheel with some of this stuff, because the investment required to build some of this stuff is huge. And I still think the power is in working together and finding a solution that works. Because the tech people are as much asking us to help them.
Yeah.
Like we've been around for 100 and something years. We know how this industry works. They don't. They might have one person that they brought in. They know how to build tech. They don't know how, and they often underestimate the complexity of delivering projects.
Is this technology, because we typically on Bricks and Bytes speak to contractors that have either corporate venture capital arms or innovation departments, etc. We don't really speak to consultants as much. So it's interesting to hear. Do you have a process? And I don't know, James, I don't know how involved you are with like the whole innovation process. Maybe it's not under your job remit, but is there like a process to adopting this technology?
Yeah, there is. And we are kind of familiar with that. We do try and make sure we go through the various stages to make sure that the adoption is utilized as much as possible. But like you're right, we're not building large scale stuff ourselves, but we do build. So, I talked about the 3 streams, the internal tools that we build for our staff so for instance, we've built a platform for benchmarking and helping with cost estimation, things like that. We built that internally, and then we've gone through that process, that alpha, beta, minimum viable product kind of cycle to make sure that we're doing the testing in the right order and getting people bought into it. The only difference with that is we build that within the Microsoft ecosystem so that we're not having to build stuff we try and avoid building stuff from scratch internally, because there's no need. It's a huge expense, and we're not pushing out to clients per se. They're being used by a team. But the stuff that we build, where the stuff that is client facing, like I said, our digital twinning solution or our DPMO, that will have a very Gleeds look and feel about it.
Interesting. So what are your general thoughts on large consultancies developing stuff for themselves in-house to gain competitive edge against their competition? Because my vibe, based on what you say, is that you guys are not solely focused on this aspect in the business, right? You're not trying to build something super technologically advanced to gain some edge against the competition.
So I think we can gain edge towards the competition by utilizing and partnering with the right providers, because, we got to think about what we are. We're construction consultants, and we got to serve our clients first and foremost. So I know that other consultants have sprung out separate arms, but they very much are a separate entity. The core business of those ones will be exactly the same. They'll be thinking about their clients. So whether you do it by utilizing an offshoot or you do it by partnerships with pre-existing third parties, doesn't really matter. It's the same end game. You're separating the two things, because most clients, when you talk about tech, they don't care about the tech. They just care about, am I going to be able to get a better solution, usually for a cheaper price, or am I going to be able to enhance my value? So we can do all those same things as if we had an offshoot. And the stuff that, a lot of it is stuff that we are building in-house for our internal people, and that is always a differentiator. But then the kind of stuff that we are able to provide to clients, we're just utilizing the best technology in the marketplace out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And why would we build it again? If it's these companies, like I say, really want to work with good consultants like us, we've got a fantastic image and brand in the marketplace. So I don't think it stops us having that. If anything, I think it probably advances it, because it means we can be a bit more agile, and we can switch between, say you've got a partnership with somebody and it's not working, you can switch it off. Whereas if you're sinking money into developing a very, very expensive product, that's a lot more difficult to pivot from.
Yes, the example I had in mind is, for example, Foster Partners. I know that they don't do what you guys do, but it's also a large consultancy. They they also use commercial solutions that are available for everyone, but they also create internal solutions which will allow them to be basically faster and better than everyone else.
And that's exactly what we do. So funny enough, Martha Sikari, who's the head of research at Foster's, we had her on our podcast recently, and so we were talking about the similar thing. Is they're creating solutions for their internal staff to become more efficient, and that becomes a differentiator and changes them in the market. And that's exactly what we're doing. But when it comes to external stuff that you're selling to clients, I think they're the same. They're not sort of building new ways of doing architecture per se. They're just making their existing staff more creative and more flexible, more efficient, more productive.
Yeah, fair enough. Is there like a tech scouting like? Do you have like a team which is like continuously assessing external solutions and perhaps putting a case together versus build inside?
That's probably my role as the PDA task force. But I'm sure you guys find this, right, from doing the podcast. I do the podcast, and then I also do a newsletter. I call it my blessing and my curse, because it's a curse because it takes up most of my weekends, but it's my blessing because I've always got to be up to date with what's happening, because I have to read all these articles. And I'm very lucky. I've got an incredible team. They're all incredibly passionate about these things. So there's not a day that goes past where I don't get like a text or a WhatsApp from someone saying, "Have you seen this?" So, and I think that's better than paying someone to do that role. It's like, just get a bunch of people who love what they do, and you won't go wrong in that way.
You won't miss much.
I say that, but it does move pretty fast.
It does, yeah.
Should we perhaps touch on an example that you guys used some data analytics in a project that you worked on?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if you'd asked me this question sort of 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say it was relatively niche, and it was, I could have given you some examples of where we've done it, but it's becoming quite common now. So what we've done is we've created a division within Gleeds called Transform, which is we call it our data analytics and digital transformation. So if there's 2 ways we're looking at it, right? If I step back a minute, actually, we think that the future of QSs and project managers is to enable them to have the digital and data literacy skills to do a lot of the data analytics themselves. So one of the things we've done is we've launched something called the Upskill Academy, which is to train people in data analytics. And now we do that by providing a huge program of courses. Those can be lunch and learns, where people can just come in to find out what's going on, or a quick crash course on Power BI. There can be one-day courses where we dive into like a specific tool, something like Power Apps or or ChatGPT, or because we've got our own version on ChatGPT, which we call Assist, deep dive into that. And then there's also the ability for people, and we really encourage people to go onto the apprenticeships to do things like data analytics courses. So we've got loads of people throughout Gleeds doing level 3, level 4 and level 7 courses in data analytics. And the reason we do that is we're saying most tasks now that clients want, you don't want to push that to a separate team. That should just become a core part of what you do as a project manager or QS or whatever it is.
Agree.
And we're having some great success in that. But there's always going to be some really kind of tough data analytics kind of briefs that come out. And we're seeing that more and more. For that, we developed a service called Transform, which is a bunch of really, really experienced data analysts, computer scientists, data scientists to be able to carve out some very specific solutions for clients. So a client would come to us and say, we want a benchmarking service for our particular so I can't give too many names because a lot of them are under NDA, but a major client came to us, said, we've got all this data around the world and we're just not very good at making use of it. So they saw what we had done within our benchmarking capabilities for our internal team. We showed them that and they said, we want that. So we built them that. Obviously it was tweaks and it met what they had. And now that is rolled out globally across the whole organization and they can utilize the data and they can drive kind of very high level cost estimates based on their own data to kind of do that decision making. So that's just one example.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. So you build basically, or had them build some tech for their own use case and perhaps internal use case, right?
All within, and this we do it all within. Like I say, we don't build software, so we do it all within the Microsoft environment. Because if you look at what Microsoft provide now, well, it could be Google, it could be any of them, but let's just take Microsoft as an example. You can probably service 90% of the average customer's briefs by utilizing Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, OpenAI models. And that's what we found. I think when you're in this space, your expectations of what client might want is probably 3 or 4 years down the line. What clients often want now is just make sense of our data, please. So really, really straightforward. And just doing that for them, they'll be delighted with that. So we've done quite a lot of doing that for various major companies around the globe.
That's very interesting. You touched upon something, James. You mentioned Assist with like an internal GPT system that you guys use, which my assumption might be there's some kind of like enterprise data or knowledge management system. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, so Assist is basically our fine-tuned LLMs. So going back to what you were talking about, Martin, where there was this whole thing around ChatGPT, can we use it, can we not? And one of the first things we had to do was understand the ramifications of...
Can we use it?
Well, basically, yeah. You know, or if we do use it, what are the concerns around it? And we said, well, we've got to get some kind of AI policy because we knew that some firms were shutting it down, some firms were turning a blind eye to it. So we kind of, the first version of the AI policy was massive. It was like, we tried to imagine every single scenario where an AI solution is being used. And we realized that that's probably not the right way to go because the tech's moving so fast, it will always be outdated. And number two, you know, no one's going to read it because it's too big. So when we boiled it down to the fundamentals, like what we're trying to say here, we realized that we're actually not telling people to do anything different than what they already have to do under their professional obligations. So as a chartered surveyor, for instance, there's certain obligations we have to go by. And one of them is big around client confidentiality. And I boil it down even further than that. Just don't do anything stupid, right? Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't forget about AI, but you know, you shouldn't be sending client confidential information by email, and you shouldn't be leaving it on a train or a tube. You know, that we've heard horror stories about that. So it's exactly the same when you're using these large language models or any kind of AI. If number one rule of thumb is if in doubt, don't use it, right? Check. Number two, if it's client-sensitive information, ask yourself, would you send this by email? Would you leave this on a train for others to read? And if the answer is no to that, then probably don't use it. And if it's client, always ask the client. It's really, really simple. So that broke it down for us into a 2-page policy rather than a 20-page policy, which is AI does not override your professional obligations. You cannot use the excuse, oh, sorry, that was wrong, I used AI. You are still a chartered surveyor, you're still a professional project manager, and that won't go. And that seems to have worked. I think we shouldn't underestimate how dangerous these tools are, but it's no different from Google, and we've got to treat it in a similar way, I feel, just to let people know what the guardrails are, and don't overcomplicate the message. Otherwise, things will fall between the cracks. So what we did with that is we said, well, actually, the other thing is we don't really want people going out onto ChatGPT. So we developed our own version of it, which is a fine-tuned version, but we've made it safe. So, for instance, we don't allow at the moment people to upload stuff. Number two, it's all within our environment. So, there's no confidential information training the base model. And number two, we've the source prompts that we've put into it is making it safe. So, for instance, we've said, if this information isn't within these parameters, go back and say, we don't have that information, rather than going out and hallucinating. And we've turned down the propensity to 0 for it to hallucinate. So there's very kind of practical things you can do to make these large language models safe to use. Now, obviously, what we want to do over time is utilize, there's a balance to be had between being on the cutting edge and...
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So we had to start somewhere, and we're training these things, and we're starting to realize where the barriers are all the time, and we never go beyond the barrier. But at the same time, what we don't want to do is get to the point where people say, this isn't good enough, therefore I'm going to go to ChatGPT and bypass the company obligations. And everyone's facing this.
Yeah.
I think my personal opinion, the worst thing you can do is try and shut it down, because then people will just go and use their personal phone.
Yeah. I'm actually a very big believer in this internal LLMs. I think this will be a big future, especially for consultancies. Like, we gather so much data, and we can speed up the process of design or delivering projects through them. Like, what's your idea? Like, if you can share whatever you can share on this, like, what do you think was the cost to develop it in your case? And is it like reoccurring cost that it's being applied to it every single month?
So the thing is, right, is like, if you had asked that question, say, even 4 years ago, and you look at the solution, you would imagine that this is like, millions, or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. But the barrier to entry has come right down, because we're not, if we were saying here, right, what we're going to do is Gleeds are going to train, or whatever company is going to train their own large language model from scratch, that's a huge, huge investment, right? But because we're utilizing existing models, all we're doing is the API call and the credits that involves in terms of the maintenance cost. And then the cost of building what we've done is been pretty much, we've done it internally. So it's not a huge amount of money. There's a bit of money in some other areas technically, but it's nowhere near what it used to be, and it's less than you might think. I mean, just go into ChatGPT, you can create your own custom GPT right now for free. So in theory, anyone could go, like, if you're a small, medium enterprise listening to this, right, there's no reason why you can't go and get a fine-tuned large language model for your business using the freely available custom GPTs, right? Or you could go a step further and buy a ChatGPT Teams license, which then gives you a bit more security, because you're assured that it's not training the model. Or you could buy an enterprise model. So it's actually, the barrier to entries come right down to be able to do these things. There are then, for other things that we've done where you don't want to rely on a separate model at all, you can utilize these open source models like the Llama model, which is the meta model. And there's lots of these open source models where you can have it running just in your local environment. So it doesn't go anywhere. You're not relying on any external systems at all. So it's for me, it's hugely exciting, because the barrier for entry is so low now that it's not even just for the big corporates. Anyone can get involved in this stuff. And I would encourage anyone to experiment with it.
What about a skill set? Do people need to have programming skill set? No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily, right? It depends how, like I say, take the example before, say you're a small business and you've got some processes and some information, you could train a custom GPT model without any programming skills. It's so easy that, I could probably teach someone to do it in about 30 minutes. So, but obviously that gets more advanced. If you start looking at the agentic stuff, that becomes a little bit more complicated, and you need somebody who understands how to program, utilizes this system called LangChain. That becomes a bit more. So it's a sliding scale. It's anywhere from zero cost almost, or very little, all the way to, you need some very clever people putting these agentic workflows together. But that's not an excuse. I think the message is for anyone out there who's thinking, how do I get started in this? It's honestly, there's YouTube videos out there. You can probably call somebody that who's done it, and they can talk you through it in a very, very short amount of time. I mean, the Project Data Analytics Task Force, what I was talking about before, that's part of what we do, is getting that education out there for people to understand where the case studies of where this is being utilized, and also how to do it.
I'm very excited about the future of AI agents, and well, not even the future, perhaps the now and the very near future, and how much this will disrupt the day-to-day of perhaps a QS specifically, and not just QS, but even any, let's say, office worker in air quotes. We had a chat, James, before. We were talking about, and you mentioned it earlier in this podcast about workflows, but essentially everything a QS does will be, there's a workflow, right? Like, and there's a deliverable at the end of it, and every deliverable has a set of 5-10 steps or whatever you need to do to produce and then deliver that deliverable. Do we think that AI agents will be able to go from, let's say it's a 10-step process, go from step 1 to 10 without a human in a loop? For example, let's just say production of tender documentation. Seems to me in my head that whole process could be pretty much automated, because a lot of it is just crunching data and words and numbers and putting them into a nice format, which then gets sent out to a market.
Yeah. So the key word you mentioned there is human in the loop. So a lot of people get really scared with AI agents because they think you give it a task and then it goes and sends something out, and the next moment you'll get a call from someone saying, what the hell's this? But that's not the way it works. That the human in the loop is really important. So within these agentic workflows, you can set checkpoints where a human can check what's happening and set approvals for it along the way. So let's take the tender process, for instance. The first port of call might be to develop a contents and around what they'll be including in it. Now, you could set it to go straight to the next task, which is then start producing it. But the sensible thing to do would be actually to say there's a human in the loop intervention point here where an email or something goes to a human to say, yeah, okay, I like that, carry on, or no, that's not quite right. I think that's the immediate future. I mean, when I talk about the future, right, I break it down into anything from now to 2030. I don't trying to predict over 2030. I think we're getting to existential kind of discussions about.
Maybe.
So I'm not going there.
I think someone predicted AGI in 2029, right? That was in a super intelligence book.
Well, some of them are predicting sort of, 26, 27. I mean, but what the interesting thing about the AGI is all the top guys, the Elon Musk, the Altman, is within the next 10 years. Some say next year, but within the next 10 years. So when I say my predictions, I always caveat with that, because I think there'll be a point where there'll be autonomous organizations running the whole thing. But for now, to not make people fear it too much, if you're, whatever you are, it doesn't matter, QS, PM, if you imagine it as having an AI workforce doing stuff for you. So you're the same way that you get a piece of work back from maybe a graduate and you check it and you send it back until it's right, you'll be doing the same thing, just with an agent. They'll be providing something to you, you'll probably caveat it, go back. And that human in the loop will ensure that nothing goes out until the professional person, going back to the point I said that the responsibility lies with the professional person, has still done their checks. That's the way I think it's going to go. It's prediction, of course, but that's the first step, I think, towards making people comfortable with AI agents.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. It says both of you are quantity surveyors. So that's exactly my intuition as well. That's how it's going to be, that humans are just checking, making sure that nothing is going out, which is not correct. But so are we not doing it right now? Like where we are in this process, is it like, are we 20% in it or like 70%? Where do
I'm
you
almost
see?
certain it can be done
Like now or in the future?
now.
No?
Yeah, I think bits of it are being done. Like, I mean, there's certain, like I talked about some of the tools that we've got. It's kind of bits of it are being done, but it's not being joined up in an agentic workflow. So I think Owen's right. Like if you looked at all the constituent parts, if we sat down here and looked at the process, you'd probably say, yeah, that can be that can be, that can be, and you'd probably get 80%. The bit that hasn't been done is joining it all up into an agentic workflow, so the agents are talking to each other. At the moment, it's still a manual process going from that bit of automated output to that bit of automated output.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference.
I have a thesis that you'll have this concept of the AI enabled consultancy.
Yeah.
Somewhere in London, which just has like 3 or 4 maybe XQSs or whatever, and they're just managing a team of agents and they're delivering the output of say 100 QSs typically. And everything is done with AI by AI with them just checking and then delivering it to the client.
100%.
Well, did you see this story? So in our newsletter that we published this week, there was a story about micro companies. They're talking about these companies where it's just 1 or 2 people, but they're acting on the scale of a conglomerate
15,
because they've got all these AIs working. I think that is inevitable. And it's so hard to get your head around because people kind of immediately start thinking of, oh, well, that means outsourcing. We've seen that before, but it still needs managing. And, there's a scaling limit to it. But it's not, because you can really scale it quite fast because these AI agents, if you start taking humans out of the loop at certain points where you get comfortable with it, it can move quite fast.
Yes. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that that's the future. There will be smart and technical people developing this LLMs and then getting such a big returns on their businesses because
Exactly.
people will not catch up that quickly, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I honestly think that is an occurrence less than 5 years away.
Oh yeah, 100%. Year 2, perhaps even maybe. So
I think it will start happening this year. We've said 2025 is going to be the year of the agents. I think by the end of this year, there'll be some absolutely concrete case studies of what we've talked about happening in the market.
Okay, James. So on this subject, where do you see, like looking at the construction consultancies, where do you see agents being applied, like maybe right now or the soonest? Talking design or perhaps like what you guys do, like what's the earliest?
I've struggled to think of a scenario where they wouldn't work in, apart from on-site construction. But even that with humanoid robotics come in. But to start with, it is going to be the kind of the kind of production of whether that's design or whether that's reports. So it is going to be very much around the consultancies. And I think what you'll find is a lot of large players experimenting with it, but then a lot of SMEs popping up, or not SMEs, like, startups popping up, trying these things. So it'll be a combination. It'll be coming at both ends, like the investment from the big companies and then some startups having a go. And you know what it's like. It only takes one of them to really crack it, and then things move very, very fast. Where a client can see that they can save significant, because it always comes down to money, right?
That's right.
Where they see they can save a significant amount of money, they'll do it. I mean, the thing is, it's not quite there yet. So there's a few AI agents out there that I've tried, and it's like near, you can smell it, but it's not quite there.
Yeah.
There's one called Sintra that I've tried, and you can see, okay, it needs another 6 months, but it's so close.
Yeah.
But
so
at the moment,
months, nothing, right?
Exactly. But what the problem is that you've got to be careful where you enter the market, because I know a few people who've tried Sintra and said, oh, I used it, but it didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. Therefore, I'm never going to try it again.
Yeah.
This is what the problem with ChatGPT. How many people have you heard said, have you used ChatGPT? Oh, yeah, I used it when it first came out and it didn't give me a very good answer.
Yeah.
So I've dismissed it for the rest of its life. It's like the most ridiculous way of dealing with things. It's like you got to, I think it was Sam Altman who said, just remember, these AI models are the worst that you would ever use in your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with the agents, right? It's like, okay, yeah, it's not quite there yet, but 6 months, like you say, Martin, it's very short time just in life in general, before these things will stop using. And there'll come up a point where someone will use it and go, okay, shit, this is useful now, like genuinely useful. And people had those light bulb moments with ChatGPT, didn't they? How many people have used it and said, right, okay, I can see how I can use this. I think the same will happen with agents. And then we'll get, like I say, I think by the end of 2025, there'll be a number of case studies coming out about how people are actually utilizing it.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask one question on this. So you said that everything comes down to money, which I 100% agree. So in the future, so there's perhaps perception that larger consultancies would charge more. Yeah. And in the case that everything comes down to money, then if someone can offer more for less, then larger consultancies should not be so competitive. So what I'm asking is the future about consolidation? So the larger consultancies, because they have data and all of these system language models are growing, or perhaps are we looking into more decentralized world where you have much more smaller businesses doing much more than they used to do?
Or even people like a consumer or
Doing
end user being able to do it themselves, right?
B2, so like B2C.
It's a massive question.
Yeah.
I think we're at a crossroads, right? We're at crossroads, and there's two ways that this is going to go. And going back to why I took on the chairmanship of the Project Data Analytics Task Force speaks to this massively, because I think the big corporate companies like Gleeds and Turner & Townsend and the rest of them, plus the institutions like the RICS and the RIBA and the APM, have a responsibility to make sure that this goes in the right direction and that we protect our industry. Because even though they're looked at as very stuffy and old-fashioned traditional, a lot of it's for very good reason. Because if you let tech take it forward, then the same thing will happen. And I've spoken about this a few times. That's happened in other industries. It all looks very enticing, right? It all looked very enticing when Netflix came along and, was at £3.99. And we all said, oh, why would we bother going to Blockbuster and hiring out our videos? Because it was, and then they kill the competition and then they start raising their prices and there's nowhere to go. So this crossroads that we've got to be very, very careful on is not handing off our hundreds of years of intellectual knowledge and IP that the industry has built up, given that sometimes we don't deal with it very well, but still our knowledge, and basically handing it over to the big tech companies for a relatively short payoff. Because what will happen is there'll be 10 years' time and a client will say, well, this price, Autodesk price has gone up so much. I wish we could go back to the way we did before we get consultants involved, and they're all gone. So that's my big fear. And I genuinely am concerned about that, because once it's gone, it's gone.
I agree.
I actually see a very real scenario where that could happen.
Yeah. Well, it's happened. The reason why it's very real is because it's happened so many times before in other industries. There's so many case studies.
But on the other hand, the technology should be deflationary, so it should be driving the prices down, really, right?
Only if there's someone regulating it.
Yeah.
So
until it doesn't, that's the thing as well.
Exactly. So, it can be, this can all be for the greater good if we do still have these institutions like the RICS and the APM and the PMI telling their professional consultants, who are now all data enabled and digital literate, that this is how you have to do it, rather than letting clients go out and buy these things themselves. and then because it's not in their interest either, because the same thing, the Netflix thing will happen to them in 10 years' time when their prices go through the roof and they've got no way of checking it because it's all one big black box. And there's no profession to be able to monitor it and make sure that things are being done in the right reason, for the right reasons, and not just for the corporate benefit of a big tech conglomerate.
Well, I also see the advantages of big consultancies like Leeds, is they already have we use the word distribution, so they already have the name and they can get in front of the customers. They've got the reputation and whatnot. So it's very unlikely that the customers that Leeds are serving are going to trust two guys in black t-shirts creating AI agents which deliver a QS service, say.
No, but they would trust Autodesk or Microsoft, wouldn't they? Or Google, or
Yes.
which is the worry.
Yeah,
'Cause
that's true.
That's what they'll buy them. They'll be talk about consolidation. You'll see they might. I think that's what will happen.
Yeah, you're right. Because what did Apple do?
Yeah, they just go out.
I think they launched some kind of floor plan generator or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah.
That's why I switched to Google Pixel 9 Pro Fold.
He's been saying everyone this, by the way. So let's not go there.
Yeah, I'm too sucker. I tell you, I'm an Apple sucker, and I feel I feel dirty about it, but there's no getting out from me. I'm too deep in.
Well, until you're not. That's what I can tell you.
Well, maybe one day I'll break out.
I feel like we are not going down a rabbit hole, but we're probably scratching the surface of James's brain and conscious of time. And you've mentioned it a few times, James, but could you talk to us about the Project Data Analytics Task Force? Because I think it's, especially if people are based in London, it's something that if you're interested in AI and the future of construction, you should probably consider getting involved.
Yeah. So the Project Data Analytics Task Force, and it's not just London-based, it just happens to be where some of the events are held. It's global, actually. We have people on the board from Holland, and we're trying to sort of widen it even further. But it was set up quite a while ago by a guy called Martin Paver. I don't know if you know Martin from Projecting Success. He's an amazing guy, and he's very, very passionate about data literacy. And he foresaw a lot of what's going on now. But the mission then was just getting people to understand around how we should utilize data better in our industry. And the only way to do that is by working together and sharing our data, because we just don't have enough data to get all precious about our own data. So he set it up, and he got it to the white paper, and he got it to the point that it was, a really good platform. And he handed over the reins to me last year. And we've kind of changed our emphasis slightly, because the message is out there now about everyone's kind of the pennies dropped that data and AI is important. But now the question is, well, how do I get started in this? So our mission's changed slightly, and we have 6 key objectives. I'm just going to get the website up so that I don't forget them all. But effectively, it's all about outreach. So making sure people understand what is going on. So one of them is academic collaboration. So we've got a number of universities on there. So UCL are on there, University of Sheffield. So we're able to kind of get all that academic research that's going on out there. We've got government and industry collaborations. So we work with the institutions. So we've got APM on there. We've got PMI on there. We're trying to get RICS on there. They're not yet, but they have been very supportive of what we're doing. We've got the Major Projects Association. And then from government, we've got the IPA on there. So the IPA have really kind of led the focus on this, and we help them with their recently released report about how to utilize AI on government projects, which doesn't mandate AI, but it basically is a very, very strong endorsement for it. Then we do knowledge dissemination. So in other words, that's why I do the newsletter and the podcast. Just there's so much out there that people are like, I don't know where to start. So we're trying to boil that down into a weekly newsletter just to say this is what you need to know. And then we do podcasts with some really cool guests just to tell, so they know what's happening. For instance, we had the lady from Foster and Partners on recently. And then we do events and networking. So we do a once a month meetup. They typically have been in the past in London, but we're trying to sort of widen out a bit. But the next two, I don't know when this one's going out, but it might be too late. But there's one next week, which is the 16th of January at Oracle's office, where we're going to find out what Oracle are up to in terms of their construction tech. And then there's one on, I think it's the 24th of February at EY's offices, because EY released a report recently about AI in infrastructure. So we're going to get the guys to talk about that. We're going to have a panel there. We're going to have some people from the leading consultancies talking about it. And then they've done some other initiatives like Women in Construction. And then we've done other things, like we have worked with the RICS on a recent Minecraft competition where we've gone to primary schools, and we've got primary schools children to sort of understand that when you look at construction, it's not just construction. People don't realize that you can have a career in data and get into construction. So we're trying to spread that message.
Yeah, nice.
So a lot is just about presence and outreach. So I'll send the details. Hopefully you can put the links in the show notes or something. But if anyone's interested, you can come along to the meetups. There's a website and just find out more. But it's a really cool bunch of people. We've got some great clients involved in it. There's people like the IPA, like I mentioned, the Major Project Association. We've got Sir Robert McAlpine. We've got WSP are involved. So yeah, find out a bit more. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to give me a bell.
Sure, very good. Oh, and one each?
Go for it.
Okay, so James, what is your advice for people innovating, facilitating technology within organization like consultancies?
So what's the advice for people innovating?
Innovating and facilitating technology within the consultancies.
I'm going to borrow the Meta's catchphrase, which is, just try and break things. And, I honestly think that is the best way, because if you try and set out a plan and look ahead into the future, by the time that's got off the ground 3 months in, that plan will be worthless. So the best innovations that we've come out with, funny enough, this links us nicely to the PDA task force, has come out of hackathons that we've got involved with, where we've been able to spend 2 days at a hackathon and get some ideas off the ground. And it's amazing what you can produce in 2 days. You can get a proper full working MVP in place. And then people, as soon as they can see something working, you'll be amazed at the buy-in from people rather than showing it in a deck. So I would encourage people to try and experiment. And if you're unsure about experimenting at work, you can experiment with these tools on non-work related subjects. So when someone says to me, how do I get started on like large language models, for instance, I always say, think of a personal project that you got. It might be a holiday that you're planning or kitchen extension that you're thinking, and do it on that. So in a safe place, because what will happen is if you do it properly, you'll realize the benefits of it. And then the light bulb will go off and you'll realize how you can put it over to your work as well. So I think the key really is, Martin, is just don't be afraid to experiment. Not everything you do has to be deployed. You can just experiment and see how it works. And you can be quite creative that way.
Just do it.
What? Just do it, yeah.
Nice one, Bella.
I think there may be a copyright.
What are your favorite? Because James, you're obviously very knowledgeable on the subject. So, what are your favorite resources? How do you keep up to speed with the latest advancements? Are there like typical publications that you go to? Are there newsletters that you're signed up for? That kind of thing.
I mean, obviously, I try and condense everything down into my own newsletter, which is the Project Flux newsletter. Hopefully, you can put that in the show notes.
Great plug.
But yeah, good segue. but for that, I do utilize a lot of good resources, including other newsletters. And probably it depends if you want a general one. Perhaps the best one is superhuman.com. I find that really, really useful, and they do a daily newsletter, and you can just kind of skim through that. If you want more kind of project related stuff, then there's a few out there. There's another podcast called Gen AI. That's a little bit more technical, and you get the guy from Nodes and Links on there. So Greg's on there, and you get a guy from M-Plan on there. Not Dev, but the CTO. Yeah, exactly. So they talk quite technical. So our podcast is a bit more for the lay audience. Project Flux is a bit more for the lay audience. They go a bit deeper into the technical side of things, and we find that really, really useful. And then in terms of resources, there's a lot of good books out there. There's one in particular that I absolutely love, and I'm actually getting him on my podcast soon. It's called, I want to get the name right, so I'm just going to look it up. It's by a guy called Jeff Woods. And then the title of the book is The AI-Driven Leader. What I loved about it is so practical. It's not particularly construction related, but pretty much everything they write about. And he's got a great website that goes with it. That's got a lot of resources on it. There's loads of good stuff out there, but those are the kind of immediate things that spring to mind.
Yeah, it's very helpful because, again, there is an abundance of knowledge ultimately. And when there is so much, it's really difficult to discern between what is worth the while and what is just noise. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's tricky.
All right, James, could you tell our audience where they could find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at LinkedIn. Presumably I can give you all the links and you can put in the show notes. So there'll be a link for me at LinkedIn. I will also give you the newsletter, the PDA Task Force website, which has an email on there if you want to get in touch. And we'll also give you the link to subscribe to the Project Flux newsletter. And that will also point in the direction of our podcast as well. It'd be great to get you back as a guest on the other side to our podcast at some point.
Yeah, looking forward to the invite.
Excellent.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, James.